In today's video, we're going to be running through how to use n8n, everything from the basics all the way through to something a bit more complex, like using n8n's AI agents. We're going to have a lot to cover in this video, so all of the timestamps are going to be below, which will enable you to jump around to the parts that you want so that you can find exactly the part that you're looking for and where you need some help, whether it's actually figuring out how to use Google, the AI agents, how it compares to platforms like make.com, all of the different functions and variables. You'll be able to find it in this video. And if you've got any questions or queries around how to use n8n, AI agents, or anything wider, you'll be able to come along, join our community, which will be in the link below. You'll also be able to get access to our board that we're going to be running through today. So if we come across, this is going to have all of the information around the different nodes, where to use it, what is it, how it leverages it. We're going to have all of the links as well so that you can click through and find all of the information you're looking for. We talk about some of the different functions here. We talk about AI agents, how they work, how they're different, as well as some links around actually querying the knowledge bases. So maybe you've got a vector database, all the different apps in here, what's native as well, so like the flow side of it here, lots and lots of information that you'll get access to. We've got lots of resources as we come into Classroom. We'll come across to our AI agents, and we've got lots of videos here from make.com. We've got n8n, we've got VoiceFlow. We can come back and we've got lots of other automations as well. We've got some masterclasses around AI and automation business analyst, how to analyze processes, some prompt engineering courses, some AI 101 courses as well. So lots and lots of resources in the community. So let's jump straight into the video. So first of all, what is n8n? Well, it's an automation platform very similar to platforms like make.com or Zapier. And what it enables you to do is automate those repetitive, mundane tasks that you have in your business, but also enable you to leverage AI agents, which I think these guys are leading in at the moment. It's really easy to use, lots of integrations. They've got 400 plus integrations natively, plus all the community ones that you could add in here as well. It's very easy to work with. They've got lots of compliance. They've got lots of case studies, as you can see here. So it's really easy to get on with. What we're not going to be doing today is showing you how to self-host it, but we do have another video in the top right hand corner which you'll be able to go through and look, and that's what this GitHub in the top corner is. It basically explains to you how you can run it locally on your computer using npx and node.js, or the ability to go and load it into a cloud hosted version like Render, Elastio, Docker, all of these different versions, so that you can use it on the cloud and almost use it for free. And that's going to tie us into the first part here, which is around the pricing. So if you come across to here, what you'll be able to see is that we've got three options straight away. So we've got the starter plan, the pro plan, or the enterprise plan. For many of you out there, the starter plan is going to be absolutely perfect. You're not going to need much more. If you're using it across more of a medium or larger size business, that's where you're going to be using pro and enterprise because of all the different roles, the users, as well as having the ability for projects, global variables, a couple of these different things that when you're a bit smaller, it doesn't matter as much. We're going to be charged 20 euros per month if we build annually, otherwise it's 24 euros. We've got 50 euros annually or 60 euros monthly if we're using the pro version. And what's really interesting about platforms like n8n is we're actually going to be charged by workflow execution. And what does that mean? Well, if we come across to our board that we're going to be running through today, as you can see, lots and lots of information here we're going to be running through. But to start off with, what we've got in make.com and n8n is two different ways of approaching it. So in n8n, we're going to be charged every time we complete this end-to-end process and go back and restart, for example. If we come across to the right-hand side here, what we've got is make.com. And what happens here is we're actually charged per operation, so per step in the process. So that's why it's got the difference in plans. So as you can see here, we'll be able to complete end-to-end processes 2,500 times for the starter version, and it has unlimited steps. So what we're going to be running through a bit later around some of the terms are called nodes, so they're the steps in the process as well. And what this basically means is you can do it 2,500 times versus having 2,500 steps in each process like you'll be charged in make.com. And that's where we've got another video as well, like I mentioned, around the cloud hosting, which can help optimize some of these pricings if you want to. It's also going to give you access to a few other parts as we come back to the start here, just around the templates, the integrations. You're going to be able to use community nodes, which you're not going to be able to do natively, but we're going to touch on that a bit later on. So what we're going to do first, well, we're going to sign up and we're going to go from the start. So as you can see, we've got get started. What we need to do is come through and sign up. So there we go, we can add it in there. We're going to add our newsletter just because we want to use that. and we can start a 14-day free trial. So what we're going to do first is it's going to take us into this screen. We're going to go through and just answer some of the questions very quickly, very easily, which may not be the best part for their marketing side, all of the information about it, but it's going to enable us to get into the platform nice and easy. We can add a user here. We're not going to do that today. We're going to go straight into building our setup. As you can see here, they've got some demo videos. If we also come back to their web page, we can actually come across to documentation. We'll come into here. This will load it up. And as you can see, we've got the get started pass on the left-hand side. They've got the quick start. So again, a couple of different ways of running through here, but that's why you'll probably hear, because it's lots of text. We're going to run through it and show you how to do it from scratch today together. So if we come back into our space, we can do start automating, and now it's going to load it up exactly how it would look. So as you can see here, this is the base. This is what we're going to be running through today. So on the left hand side here, we've basically got where we can store projects. So this is almost like a folder for all of the information that you're going to be generating in our scenarios. We can do add project. As you can see here, we can do the AI edge. And then what we'll be able to do is say that I'm the admin, so we can do save. And now what we'll be able to do is have this new project on the left-hand side. We can have a look at the execution, so we'll know how many times it's run. We can add our credential in here, so that's what we're going to run through and do a bit later. And then we've got the workflows, which is where we're going to be generating our automation workflows that we can use. We've got some AI agent examples that we can do. We've also got start from scratch. But on the left-hand side here, we've also got key ones like templates. So they've actually got 1,500 templates and more coming through that you're able to use. So for example, if you're looking to use some of the AI agents ones, you can click on that. We could do popularity. And as you can see here, they've got some ones all ready to go. So if I was to click on this AI agent chat, we've got use for free. You'll get a little preview here. You'll be able to click on that and it'll load it up. That looks quite simple though. So we'll come through to, for example, this WhatsApp one. So it looks like it's got a few different more steps. We can do actually use for free. We can use in our cloud version. So that's the version that we have ourselves. And now it's going to load it up for us. But we would need to add in some of our API keys there just to make sure it's all working perfectly. So that's how easy it is to use some of the templates that they've got readily available. If we come back into our workspace though, what we're going to do is start from scratch. So the first part you'll see here is basically a first step. So when we click on that, we'll have a trigger that will appear on the right hand side here. Now you'll get access to this as mentioned at the start for our boards that we've got here, but what we're going to run through quickly is just that first step. So when we're building out some of these workflows, we're going to have the root node and then subnodes. And this is going to be part of our workflow. So as we've got the example here, we'd have this as the entire workflow. But if there was to be any maybe sub-processes, or like you can see here, if we're using our AI agent, it may have subnodes that we would need to add in. So that's where if we come back to our scenario, this would be a node, and that's what we're going to be adding in. So there's two ways of accessing it, as we mentioned. You can click on this and it'll open it up, or you can right hand click in the space, you can do add a node, and it will bring it up on the right hand side. So what are triggers? Well, if we come back into our board and we come a bit further down here, triggers are basically ways that we can be executing or starting the process within n8n. So you think of it as actually triggering it, whether it's a certain time of day, another actions happen somewhere else. It's basically prompting this workflow, this agent, this process to kick off. So imagine you've got a lead generation use case. The minute they fill out a form, that would be able to start a process. And that's how quickly you can start to actually provide value versus that going into a generic inbox maybe, and then you wouldn't be able to get to it until a bit later on. n8n have actually got 11 different ways of triggering it. So if we come a bit further down here, all the resources in the link below, if you want to get access to this, it will walk you through. But what we've got are different ones. So we've got trigger manually. So this is when you basically click it and it'll execute it. We've got this SSE one. So maybe if there's another event happening on some other websites or apps, it will trigger it here. We've got on app event. So what this basically means is if something happens in another app, so as you got there, Notion, Airtable, Google Sheets, great for customer service like Zendesk or ServiceNow, you'll be able to go through and trigger this action. We've got one which is on schedule. So basically at specified times of the day, it's going to go through and execute this process. We've got the webhook calls. So again, this is where we're going to have maybe some information coming in, or we're going to be using different automation platforms to trigger some of the applications in here, or maybe you've got some other ways of interacting and sharing data. We've got the on form submission. So think your type form, platforms like that, Google Forms, we've actually got that embedded within our n8n environment. So again, that's saving you the extra £30 a month that maybe you'd pay for some of those services, and that can trigger some of our workflows. We've got when executed by another workflow, so that's clues in the title there. If you've got it stored somewhere else, maybe you're using this as like an agency or consulting model. If you've got consistent processes that happen each time, maybe you've got some prompt engineering or something similar to that, you'll be able to trigger it from different workflows, different scenarios to have this process occur. Really good for the AI agents to be able to go through and execute processes. We've got on chat message, so this is basically within n8n. If we start sending text messages off to the actual agent or workflow, it will trigger the process. We've got the next one here around email trigger. So this is really great if you're looking for an agent that will be able to sort through your emails. Maybe you've got, again, that lead generation, you've got a generic email that comes in, you'll be able to automatically trigger this workflow. We've got error workflows, so if there's any issues, it's going to start this process, and we'll be able to do n8n as well, so if we need to make any changes. And if we come back into our scenario, that's just exactly on the right hand side here. So they're all the ones that we mentioned, and we've got the other ways tucked away in here. So for example, if we were to come through and do trigger manually, what we can do is test workflow, and that would trigger that one there. If we change this to the on chat message, what we'll be able to do is come out of here, open chat, and say hi there. And then what it will do is it will capture that response, and we'll be able to see it in here. So that takes us nicely into the next stage. So we're going to have table, JSON, or schema as the three views that we'll be able to see our data within n8n. So this is the table one here. We've also got JSON, so that's how it would look in a JSON structure. And then we've got schema. Now schema is probably the one that most of you are going to use just because it's nice and easy to work with. It's really simple. I really like this view just because it's nice and easy to find what you're looking for. The other side that we're able to do as well is if we just come back to JSON, I'll be able to copy this information. You can actually fix set data. So if we come to the right hand side here, you can either do it by editing the output or pinning this data. If I click pin, what this basically means is it will turn purple. So now every time we execute this workflow, it will use this data that we've pinned. What we can also do is edit it. So for example, we can change it to hi, we can do save, and now basically it'll only send out the message of hi as we go through in the future. And that's really useful if we want to go through and do some testing versus using up executions to actually do some testing. Instead, what we're able to do is actually just get that data fixed at the start and then go through and test the steps as we go through and develop our environment. So that's the first part. The second part, if we just come back to our environment, what we'll be able to do is have actions. And that's where we've got a couple of different options here. So as mentioned, we've got ones in app. So that's where you're going to be using Google, Telegram. We're going to be using Notion, all of these different platforms, ServiceNow. And that's where we've got the over 400 integrations that we'll be able to use to be able to execute that. The next one, we've got some core modules. So this is ones that have been developed by n8n and we'll be able to leverage them. We're going to touch on that in a minute in a bit more detail. We've got data manipulation or data transformation. We've got the flow, so how it's adjusting the flow, the information going through. Our AI agents, so again, really useful. I think they're market leading in this space here at the moment. And then there's community nodes as well, which we're not going to touch on later. We're going to run through that quickly now. And that's where, as you can see here, they've got specific ones that have been developed, but you have to use, again, that self-hosted, that cloud or local version. So for example, here, this is a very popular one. We've got another video on the channel, which I'll link above, which is all around MPC, and that is Model Context Protocol. So it basically enables that AI agent to speak to any of the different applications that it's working with. And I think it's really good, it's really useful, but because it's using external servers, it's just that data security side that you've got to keep an eye on. So how do we access these? Well, if we come back into our scenario, again, as mentioned, we can do plus, and it's going to bring up these options for us. So again, we've also got this human in the loop one. So maybe we're messaging some of the team, we can wait for their responses to come back, or we've got all of these different actions that we can execute. So what are all these different ones? Well, if we come back into our environment, let's just run through them quickly. Again, you'll have access to this in the link below, or you can pause it as we go through. So for some of the core ones, we've got ones like this code module here, which enables us to run like Python, JavaScript natively. We've got HTTP requests, which is really useful to send off information or get it back. We've got the webhooks, which we mentioned a bit before, as well as the execution of some workflows. We've got the execution of data. So again, if we're looking for some data, we can recall it. We can do FTP, so maybe we're moving information between different servers. We've got the n8n one, which we mentioned a bit earlier. Same with the forms. We've also got a do nothing step, so maybe we're just doing some testing. We can have that as a placeholder. We've got the response to webhook, which we didn't mention a bit earlier. What this means is if we get a webhook that comes to us, we'll be able to maybe execute some of the process, get some output data like a personalized response for a lead or something, and then we'll be able to send that back to the original webhook, so then it will be able to use it and share it back with the customer. And we've got the ability to wait. So if you use platforms like made.com, it's like that sleep module where you're able to specify that the process will stop for a certain amount of time. And we've got 11 different modules that we can use, which is really great to see because, again, we're not having to pay for any extra integrations. They're all useful natively, and that's why we've got the n8n on the right-hand side here. The next ones we've got are around data transformation. We've actually got 20 different nodes that we can leverage in this process. So we've got different ones like the AI transform. So you basically talk to it in plain English, and it will be able to go through and execute those instructions for you. We've got summarizing, which is clues in the title there for summarizing some of the key information or adding up different elements. We're able to compress files into a zip format. We can run some code. We can get some date time values or change that as well. We're going to be touching on functions a bit later as well, which is how you can actually adjust some of the date time format. We've got the editing fields. So this is where you're able to add, set, or specify some of the data. We can convert JSON data to binary files as well. We've got crypto here, which is not Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything like that. What it is it's around your encryption of some of the ones like maybe you've got a digital signature, API keys, you'll be able to encrypt those. We've got some filters here. So again, this is just how we can adjust some of the process as well as some of the data that we've got coming through. We've got limits on how many things can come through. We can remove any of the duplicates coming through to really clean up that data that we're using. We've got split out. So maybe if we've aggregated the information that comes through in an array, we'll be able to split it out and individually execute each one. We can edit images natively. We can also aggregate the information as we mentioned a bit earlier. So this is where we can take lots of separate data, put it all together so it's one bundle that we can use. We've got merge, so maybe we've got different streams or different areas that need to come into the next part of the workflow. We'll be able to leverage that here. We're going to be using this one a bit later, so extracting a file from binary data, and then we'll be able to use it in maybe like a RAG, so our AI agent's knowledge is memory that we can use in the future. We've got HTML, so again, this is basically just editing it, marking up anything in that space. We've got Markdown, we've got XML, and then we've got the rename of the keys as well. And they're all the different actions that we can take in data transformation. Now, if we come a bit further down, we've now got the flow ones here. We've got 9 different executions that we can do natively. So as you can see here, we've got filtering, we've got if statements. This is really good, for example, in your invoice processing, because what you could say is if the total amount of that invoice is over £5,000, we'll send it through one route. If it's below £5,000, we'll send it through a different route. We've got the looping over items, so this is really good for that batch processing. We've got the merge, which we just mentioned a bit earlier. We can compare data sets as well natively. We've covered execution a bit before. We've got stop and throw an error, so we can do some error testing or just stop the process if we don't want it to go any further. We can do some switching. So again, this is a bit similar to your if statement. We can actually send it down different routes. And we've got the wait function as well, as we mentioned a bit earlier. And that's going to be all the different flow areas that you've got. Now, the one that most of you are probably interested in and going to use the most is around the advanced AI. So we've got 18 different elements within this, and we're going to run through some of them now. So this top one here, that AI agent, that's going to be the one the majority of you are going to use. Within AI agent, we're going to touch on it a bit later. There's a few different variations of it depending on the use case that you're working through. We've got the memory of the agent as well. We've got OpenAI, so this is actually OpenAI directly integrated. It's got lots of more functionality like generating, like doing transcriptions, analyzing images. It's just that native one that's embedded. I think it would be really great if n8n could include this for some of the other LLMs out there as well. We've got a basic LLM chain. So this is basically just having a native AI brain that works in here straight away. So you maybe don't need something a bit more complex. We've got information extractors, so we can pull out some of the key information if we need it. We've got question and answers, so this is really good in your customer support. If you've got vector databases or knowledge stored somewhere else in like a Google Drive that you've then put into another sort of storage area, an AI brain reference area. That's what we call RAG. So it's basically taking that data, put it into a vector database so that we can recall it and chat to it as we need. We've got sentiment analysis actually natively, so this can identify some of the tones maybe that you've got coming through customer service. That's a really good use case. We've got summarization. So again, if you've got your email categorization agent, or you've got an email that's automatically responding, that could be really good to use as well. We've got text classifier, we've got document loaders. So again, some of these start to tie into that direct AI agent or steps in the AI agent. We've got lots of information here about different ways. That chat memory one is one that we're going to be using a lot, because what it enables us to do is refer back to like the last 5, 10, 15, 20 messages that have been in the chat that we were going through. So there's lots of different ways that you can use this. And again, we've got 18 different elements in this alone. So if we come back into our environment, so let's go through and build out a use case, run with some lead generation. So we've got an e-form coming in. So what we'll be able to do is just delete this step. So we can do delete, or again, at the top here, we've got that bin icon, so we can get rid of any previous executions. And there we go. So what we can do now is we can add a step. We're going to do on form submission. We can copy the URL, we can just paste it into a chat, and then as we can see here, we've got one that we'll be able to use. It's not activated yet, and that's why we can't use any information. So we could say, what is your name? We've got the option here to change the elements. So maybe we want custom HTML. We've got date, drop down, email, file, hidden number. So let's go through and do text for now. We're then going to add some extra information here as well. So to do that, we'll do add form element. We can say, what is your email? We can come down, we can add text, we can do email. And then what we can go through and do is specify these as required fields. Maybe we want to see what services they're interested in. We could do services of interest. We can come down to our element type. We can do drop down list. We can come through and say chatbot. We could do AI agent, and we could do process automation. We can do this as multiple choice, or we can do required field as well. So if we have multiple choice, they'll be able to select multiple. If we have this turned off, then they'll only be able to select one. We can respond when form is submitted or workflow finishes, so a few different ways. And we've got some other options in here as well. We're not going to be touching on them today because we don't really tend to use them, to be honest, but you can go through and play around with it as you want. So we need to give it a title, so we can say interest form. Now what we'll be able to do is, as you can see, it's not been triggered, so it's not working. If we just get rid of that and then we do test step, we can then enter some data. We can do Alex Follow. We can do test1234@gmail.com. As you can see, it was also doing some data validation in the background as well. So if I get rid of that, you'll see that it needs an email address to go through. So it helps with that formatting a bit later on. We've also got the services of interest. So again, as you can see there, because it's that single select and not multiple choice, we're only able to set a specific one in there. Now, if we do submit, we can come back into our AI agent. And as you can see here, we've now got all of that information coming through that we'll be able to use a bit later on. So for example, we've got the name, the email, the chatbot, we've got the service of interest. So all of the information that we would need. We can add some description in there if we want to, just if we've got multiple people in our team, they'll know what data is coming through. So what we're going to go through and do next is we're going to pin this data. We're going to come out of here. We're going to come across and we're going to search for Airtable. So as you can see there, Airtable comes to the top. Or if we wanted to find it manually, we would be able to come into action in an app. We would then be able to find Airtable here. And now we've got lots of different ways that we can use it. So as we discussed a bit earlier, we've got the different triggers that we can use. As you can see, there's only one there because we're using it in a step, but we're able to use it in different ways. If we had it as its own trigger, what we're going to do is say create a record. And now we need to go through and add all of our credentials. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to come into here. This will be the same for lots of the other different apps that we're working with. We're going to go through and do Google a bit later on as well. We're going to come through and do new credential. Now, as you can see here, we've got auth2 or we've got access token. Now we're going to be doing the access token today, but you can go through and use auth2 if you want something a bit more secure. So how do you do that? Well, we need to come into Airtable. We've got a demo table that we're going to be using here today. You want to come to the top right hand corner. We want to come down to Builders Hub. As you can see here, we can do the OAuth integrations, or we can do the access tokens. For an access token, you just want to come in here, we'll do n8n master class. The main ones that you need to give it access to are read and write of data records, and the other ones are read and write of schema. The other ones that you can add in as you want, but it really has to have those ones at the core. So we'll add that in for the last couple of ones. So we've got it all ready to go there. Now we can add it to our base. Now, if you're using lots of different bases, what I really recommend is you add them all in here for this one application versus having one credential for each of the different bases that you're working with, because we can go through and specify the base a bit later on. So there we go, I've just specified n8n master class as the one we're working with, and we'll get this access token generated. Now if we come back into our one, we'll come back into access token, we'll paste in there and do save. Now, when it goes green, that means you're fully authenticated or it's working, it knows it's working. So always look out for that green part there. We've got the other details on the left here around sharing and details. You don't need to go through and add anything in there at the moment. We can rename it to Airtable token n8n master class, and we can do save. So now we've got all of the different options here. So if we come into our first part, we've got base and record. So as you can see here, lots of different actions that you can do. So what we're going to do is record. We're going to do create. So as you can see here, we've got create new, delete, get, search, update. So think of all those processes where you're going through and adding something manually. When you've got some standardized data, we could get this to go through and do it automatically. The next stage is we need to come down to our base. So this case, we only have one, because if we come back into our base, we've only authenticated and added in this n8n masterclass one. So we're able to go through and use that. For the tables, again, we've only got one table in here, but if you've got multiple, you would need to specify that. So now we've got a few different ways of working. So for the mapping mode, you can do it manually or automatically. So what automatic means is n8n is basically going to have a quick look, see where it should specify those fields, where it should add them in, and it will do it automatically. We're going to do manual today though. So how do we add the data in here? Well, what we're able to do is actually just drag it across. So for example, name, we've then got what is your email, and then we've got service interested. And again, we've specified on the left hand side for this data not to change, so we'll be able to test this a couple of times. Now, when it goes green, that means it's able to use that data, it understands what it is, where it's coming from. If it's ever red, it won't understand it. So for example, here, if I get rid of your, we can see it's gone red because it doesn't know where that information is coming from, and it wants it to go through and be changed to what is your name. So always keep an eye on that. If it's grey, that's probably because it's one of the variables or expressions that we're using, and that's why it will just depend on the circumstance that's going through. The other side that we can show you as well is just the JSON side. So for example here, again, it works exactly the same way. So if we were to get rid of name, we would be able to pull that across. And as you can see there, it's exactly the same. So no matter if you're using schema, table, or JSON, you'll be able to pull this information across and use it in there nice and easy. So just think about which way you prefer. I tend to use schema quite a lot just because it's a really nice interface and makes it nice and easy to work with. You'll also be able to open it up. So for example here, if we open this up, we can see what it will look like to n8n as it executes it, which is one of the features I absolutely love. So for example here, we've got what is your name, and it would see Alex Followill. If we add this next part in here, which is just the email, as we can see, it's now Alex Followill and our email, so we can just delete that. And now we've only got Alex Followill again, which is what we want. We can do some options at the bottom here, so typecast, but we're not going to go through and use that today. We can come to the top, and because we've got this data set, we can do test step, and now we'll know it's executed successfully because in the bottom right, it will say that, but also it will have a little green tick. So now if we come back into our Airtable, as you can see here, these were just some empty rows. We've now got that information stored. If we come back and we come out of here, what we'll also see is that it's gone green, which means that it's executed that process successfully, and we'll be able to use that information in the future. Now, if we do executions, what we see on the left-hand side here are all of the different steps and how long it took. So for example, it was 0.046 seconds to complete when we did the test click. It took 0.025 seconds after we sent a message in. It took 0.03 to actually receive the form. And if we go back here, it took just under a second for us to actually trigger this Airtable and get that information stored. So we can do save, and now all of that information is saved. We can also, as you see here, we've got inactive or active if we toggle that. Basically what this means is it will put it into like a live situation. So what it would do is, instead of us having to trigger it with test workflow at the bottom, this eForm would constantly be running in the background, and then it would enable us to automatically get information coming through no matter the time of day. So let's go through and add some more steps in. And now, if you're not able to see all of your nodes in one place, what you can do is come down to the bottom left hand corner, you can do tidy up, and it'll put it more into a manageable size. And as you can see in the bottom left hand corner here, this is just the view board, so you can move it around through there, or you can use your mouse and just actually go through in here as well. Before we move on though, maybe we want to capture today's date. So in here we could do today, and we could do date, so we know when that so we know when that customer reached out. We can change this to European. We can do create field. So how are we going to do that? Well, there's two different ways. We just need to refresh this data. So we're going to refresh the columns. We can come down and do the date time, so we can specify that ourselves, or we can do expression. Now, this is where we're going to go through and be able to use some of the functions. So in n8n, everything is done through these curly brackets. So you want to add 2 in there. And then what you'll see is we've got lots of different information that we can use. Now, to get today's date, we want to do $ and now. And what this will do is actually the date time of the current moment. There is another one called today, which you can use as well. We're just going to use now instead. So we'll do this as single line text. We'll do save for now. And then if we come back into our scenario, and then what we should do is get a perfectly executed scenario. So there, as you can see, it's that datetime format. Again, we can specify into different date times. So if we just zoom out a bit and come to the top, what we can do is see lots of different functions that are done natively. So we've got the different ones for array in here. Pause and read through them as much as you want. We've also got the links in here as well, so you can go through and see them. We've got the date time ones in here. So again, we've got the ability to play around with it and convert them. We've got some of the number ones in here as well, so we can check if it's a boolean, if it's a float, we can do numbers. We've got lots of different elements in there. We've got ones around objects. We've also got the ability to do it with strings as well. So lots and lots of different ways that you can really analyze and extract the data. So what we can go through and do next is just around some of those different tests. So we could do, for example, an if statement. What we'd be able to do is just see in here if 2 values actually equate to each other. So for example, here we could do services, and we could do chatbot. We could do test step, and then what it will do is it will come through and it says it's executed it successfully. It's got a yellow triangle here, which is just a warning because it's not able to go through and do any additional steps. Now, if we come through and just change that to string is not equal to, and we do test, what we'll be able to see at the bottom here is it goes through to false. So there's lots of different ways that you can go through and analyze your data, and that's where we're using this element here. So within this, a string is basically words. So this is where we're going to be submitting maybe your name. We've got some text, you're doing some prompting. That's going to be all of the information. So it's just text that's going through. Now, numbers is, again, maybe you've got a financial value that's going through. You've got specific numbers coming through. That's where we would want to use this one instead. Date time. This is basically where we're going to be assessing the date time that we've got to see if it's ahead of a certain date time, if it's less than a certain date time, if it's 1 week in front, 2 weeks in front, if it's a historic time. So again, we can go through and do that as well. Boolean is basically true or false. So what we're saying is something is something, or it's just not something. An array is basically where we've got, if we come across to our documentation, we can come back to here. What we're basically able to do is open this up. And then as we can see at the top here, it's basically just all of the information that we've got within an array. So we could say the average number, we could chunk it up, we could actually come a bit further down, we could ask what the first item in the array is. So lots and lots of different ways of working with a lot of different data that we've got aggregated together. We would also be able to come down to object. So this is basically where we're going to be using it a bit later on for if a file does or does not exist. That's where your object is going to be, and that's why we've got the 4 options there around exist, not exist, empty, anything like that as well. We're also going to be able to convert the types where required as well, so we can specify that. We can add any options in here that we want around ignoring cases, lots of different ways that it can go through and work. We're just going to change this back to is equal to, and then chatbot, so that we can go through and do a bit more testing together. But what we can also do is use this natively through our functions in here as well. So if I just add a condition, what we can do is brackets, on both sides. We'll just change this to expression. We can do a $, and then if. We can do an if statement beforehand. So what we're able to do here is, for example, the condition basically means what we'll be testing. So for example, in this use case, we've got if the current hour is before 5 p.m, what we're going to be able to say is good day. If it's after 5 p.m, then we're going to be able to say good evening. So there's a few different ways that you can use it. You don't always need to have this actual step in here. For example, what we would be able to do is if we got rid of this, we came into Airtable, we would be able to say high value. We could do checkbox, we could do create a field. What we'd be able to do in here is you could tick it. So for example, if we came back into our environment, what we'd be able to see is if we refresh this, we could come a bit further down. We could do expression. We could do if, $if, and then what we'll be able to say yes. And then what we need to do is add 3 parts in here. You want 2 quotation marks. We'll then add in some more. So for example, if service of interest, equals chatbot, we can say true or false. So what this will do is it'll either tick it or it won't tick it for us. So if we do test step, what we should do is get an execution. So if we come back into our environment, we've now got a tick that goes underneath it because it's automatically filtered the data for us. So we've identified that actually this is a chatbot. So we know that we need to filter it as a high value opportunity. So again, think about your lead generation use cases. That's where it can be really useful to actually pre-qualify some of the data before having any of the steps that you would need afterwards, like an if statement or switch it. But for example, what we could also do is add a filter in here. So what this will do is it will really ask for the specific variables and see if it's going to move forwards, and only those ones will move forward. So again, the if statement, the switch, the filter, you can all use them interchangeably depending on what you need. So for example, if we said chatbot, and then again we could do chatbot, what it will do is it will let it progress, for example. But if we say it is not equal to, and we test that, again, what it will do is it won't output anything and it won't let us keep going. So that's where it's really good to be able to filter some of the data that you've got coming through. And that's where if we come back into our board, we also mentioned a bit earlier just around some of the different elements that you have. So for example, in the data transformation space, we could also remove any of the duplicates or split out some of the information. So lots and lots of different ways that you'd be able to use it. But let's come back into our workflow. The other way that we can do this is around budgets as well. So actually, if we came out of here, what we'll be able to do is actually come into our form. We will be able to just add a new field in here. So we could do a new form element. We could say budget. We'll be able to do our drop down option as a bit before. We could add a couple of different fields in here. So we would be able to do maybe 500. We would be able to do 1,000. We could do 10,000. And then we could do 100,000. There we go. So we could come in here and just give that a monetary value in there. Copy this. We'll just paste it in our URL. And then we'll be able to come back to the start. We can do test step. We can just refresh this and now it'll be open here. So we can do test Alex. We can do test at gmail.com. We could say that we're interested in AI agents and that our budget is £500. But before we submit that, we'll just come into our area, we'll do budget, and then we'll do currency. And then what we'll do is we'll come down and we'll say there's no decimal spaces in this side. It's going to just be a whole number. And we've got the currency field as $. What we'll do is we'll then submit our form. We can come back into our process. We'll see that we've executed one part of the step. We need to refresh the columns that we've got in here. We'll come down to budget. And then what we'll do is we'll pull it across from the right hand side. So now if I do test step, what we should do is get a new field that comes through in a second. There we go at the bottom here. So now we've got an automatic budget that's being edited and we can see that it's $500 that's come through with the currency as well. So if we come back into our scenario, what we can do is come through. We'll get rid of this. We can do switch. We could come through and do budget. And then we could say is number is greater than or equal to 500. We can add a couple of other routes in here as well. So for example, budget, we can then do 1,000. We can change this from number down to, so we need to do is equal to 500. we'll need to change this to is equal to 1000. We'll need to change this number to is equal to 1000 as well. Is equal to, we'll say that this is going to be the budget. The other ones that we had were 10,000 and we had 100,000 as well. So we'll just add that in there. We'll come through, we'll do number, we'll do is equal. The reason that we had the red part here is if I just change that back is because it's saying that it's not the correct data type for us to be able to process it. So that's why it's helping us as we go through, just make sure that we're using the right data in the right space. So we'll just add in our 100,000 in here as well. We can also rename the output as well. So for example, here we could say high ticket. And then what that will do is if we go through and do test step, is it's going to come out at the moment through this first option here. But if we come through and we add the bottom part in here, rename output as low budget, say medium budget, we can say good budget. So then if we come out of here, what we'll see is that we've got all the different elements. So if we just test this step, what we can see is that it's gone through and it's identified low, medium, high, or good budget for us to be able to execute the process. And when you're doing your data analysis side of this, you'll be able to see how many go through the different parts of the process. So that was the low budget side. Maybe we want to do some personalization to that customer though, to make sure that we respond back nice and promptly. Well, to do that, we're going to use our mail. So you can do send a mail, so we can do send an email. So this is where you can use the one natively. But what we can also do is if we just get rid of this and get rid of this, we can come through and we can do Gmail instead. And then we'll be able to send a Gmail, which as you can see here has lots and lots of more options. So we could come down and do send a message. We would need to add our credentials in here. So let's go through and do that. We'll do create a credential. We're going to need to be able to sign in. So we can click on that. We can go through and take our account through. We can do OK, connection successful. So then we'll come back. And as you can see, account created there. So now we can give this a name, main Gmail account. We can do save, we can come out of there. And now we've got the ability to send a message straight away. We could label something, draft it. So again, depending on what you want to do, we're able to use that here. So what we need to make sure that we do is that we've got all of this information tested. So if we do test step, what we're going to do is just change the value that we've got in our data. So if we come back to our test data that we've got, we're going to come to JSON, we're going to copy all of this, we're going to pin our data, but we're going to edit it. We're going to say that this is going to be 200,000. We're going to do save. We're going to come out of here. We're just going to deactivate, so using this power on and off icon just to stop the error messages coming through. So now what we can see is it's going to come through. And it's going to come and it's going to, and we're not going to get anything at the moment because we need to do greater than with the numbers equal to or greater than, because that was the highest value that we had in there. So now if we test the step, we should see that we get one high ticket item coming through. So now if we turn this on, and we'll be able to do that by turning it back on there, we'll come through and now, for example, we can come back to the left-hand side, we can come right to the start, we can pull it across and do 2. Or actually, if you wanted to use the Airtable, you'd be able to do that as well. You could pull across the email from there. What you'll notice is depending on what you've named some of these steps, it will come through and it will add it in there. So for example, it knows that we've used an Airtable node to be able to complete this process. So that's why it's got Airtable in there. It's nice and easy. So for example, if we just change it back to here, we've got the form submission. So again, if you're going through and doing some bug testing or trying to find out where that data comes from, it will show it in here nice and easy for you to be able to see it. So let's use that. We can come through and say, great to meet you. And then what we can do is we've got HTML or text. So again, depending on how you want it to be structured, HTML is basically just a different way of structuring the data. So it'll be nicely formatted for when the customer receives it. Or you can just do some plain text, which increases the deliverability. So again, just play around with it depending on your use case. We can add different options in here if we want to do that as well. We're not going to send off any emails, but that's how you'll be able to just send off an email nice and easy to a customer. So as you can see, we can also rename these different steps. So as you can see here, we can rename that to value of client project. We could say send high ticket email. So maybe we've got different steps in here as well. So say we send a low budget email, so we could do Gmail. And then what we could do is we can duplicate this. So we'll be able to do duplicate. We could bring this up to the top. We could then just tie that in there and we could say low budget email. we can send that off. And that's a different way that you'll be able to execute the processes, and you can have them for all of the different ones. Now that's sending a message out to the customer. And what if you want to notify our internal teams? Well, that's where what we'll be able to do is come pull across, and then we can search for merge. And then what we'll be able to do is change the number of inputs. So you can do append. So basically what this is going to do is add them to each other in a list. What we'll be able to do is combine them together, SQL query, or we can choose a branch as well. So lots of different ways that you can do that. Let's go back to append, and we're just going to add them all together. We'll be able to change the number of inputs as well. So for example, if we come out, we've got 2 inputs at the moment, but if we came back into here, we would be able to change that to 10. And then what we can see here is there's 10 different things that would be coming into this step before it went through and executed the rest of the process. Let's just change this back to 2. We'll come back here. And then what you would be able to do, for example, is Telegram. You could then send a message if we come through and do send. So then we could come down to send a text message. Or for example, if we come out of here, we could do Slack. We could send a Slack notification. We could do another email to each other. We could do Microsoft Teams. Lots and lots of different ways that you'd be able to use this. So again, think about what's best for your use case and how you want to interact with the data. Again, what we're doing is just a really quick demo to show you how to play around with some of these tools and how to get some of the best outputs. Now, another part that we've not covered, but we touched on a bit earlier, was around the ability to use aggregation as well as iteration. So if we actually come a bit further down, as we can see here, we've got split out and aggregate. So let's go through and just see how they work. So for example, what we'd be able to do is if I just remove that step, we'll bring it down here. We could do split out. So what we'll be able to do is data to split out. What we need to do is actually go through and just test the step beforehand because it's got no test data at the moment. So what we need to do is actually let's just delete that or test this step. So we're going to create a record, and then if we do split out, so for example, we could put across fields, and then what we'll be able to do is test steps. So for example, here we've now got 6 different items that we'll be able to go through individually versus having to go through as one complete item. Or for example, if we wanted to use the aggregator, another thing that we could do is, for example, if we just duplicate this, what we'll be able to do is get all of the records. So for example, here we could do search. What we'll be able to do is basically just search for all of them. So as you can see here, we've output the 7 items that we've currently got in our data table. So if we came back here, what we'll be able to do is then see that we've got them like this. And if we do the aggregator, what we would find is each of these that are now individual. So actually, if we wanted to aggregate individual fields, what we could do is some of the IDs. So now if we do test step, what we can find here is we've got all of the different IDs that are coming through. You just need to make sure that you've got a trigger at the start to be able to do that. So if we come into here, we've now got all of the IDs that we can use. But if we wanted to change this to all data items into a single list, you could do that. And then as you can see here, we've now got all of the information ready to go. So for example, if you split this out, and then if we did a duplicate here and we tidied this up together, what we'd be able to do is aggregate all of the fields that were coming through. So for example, it would go back to the start, and now we're aggregating all of that data back together versus it being separate like it was before. So as you can see there, we've gone from 1 item output to 6 items output to 1 item. So again, that's how you can go through and iterate and use some of the different parts together. So for example, the other side that we can do as well is around some of the code. So for example, we can come down here and we could do code. We could run this and we would be able to add some code in here. So what this has done is, as we can see, if we come to the top, basically we're going to be taking all of the submissions, all of the information that's been passed in, and then we're going to try and aggregate it together so that we can use that. So if we just do test step, what it should do is come through create a customer, then we should get some aggregations on the right hand side here. So what we'll be able to do is if we look at the JSON, we can see what the total budget is that's come through. We can see some of the unique names that have come through, unique email addresses, and the chatbot. And how do we know what the information is? Well, if we come into this, so for example, budget, where we need to make sure that we're tying up with the 2 different parts in there. This is just a really quick example that we tried to pull together just to show you how some of this coding can work to really actually get some inputs and some outputs natively within n8n without having to do any additional steps or using some of the AI models to try and get the outputs that you're looking for. And that's really useful just to keep that cost down just on some of the token side of it, and really interesting to get some of the outputs that you'll be able to go through and analyze as well. So before we start playing around with the AI agents, This is how you can see just an automation process. Now, the other way that you could use this, which is quite popular for, again, getting some lead emails that come into your inbox, is if we were to come in here, right click and do add node, we could do add another trigger, we could do other ways, we could do our email trigger. And then what this will basically do is it will keep an eye on your email that's coming through. And then what we'll be able to do is every time an email comes through, we'll be able to mark it as read because we've gone through and used it. If you've got specific ones, we could say nothing. So it's going to look open. We could do download attachments. So maybe you've got invoices coming through, you'll be able to capture that automatically. And then you'd be able to go and store that in something like Google Drive. And that's where we're going to run through the next use case, which is how to build your own AI agents. So we'll just delete this. We'll do save. We'll come out of here back into our project. We're going to do create a workflow. So AI agents are absolutely fantastic. As you can see here, it's what we're going to be looking at a high level. We've basically got that master agent, which is kind of that core part. And then we're going to give it some of our chat models. So for example, in that use case, we've got Anthropic, so being able to use Claude as the AI brain. We've got Postgres as the chat memory that they can use. We've got Gmail, so in that case, being able to send a message. But as you can see, there are lots and lots of different applications. So for example, in Airtable, you could get many from a base. So let's jump in and see exactly how it can work. And now what we'll be able to do is chat. We're going to do chat trigger. What we'll see is all of this information. We don't want to make it publicly available, but if you wanted to, what we would need to do though is have maybe some authentication just to make sure you're not getting any spam or bad messages coming through. We can also do the initial message in there. We can add some fields if we wanted to, so title, subtitle. And what this enables us to do is we need to make sure that it's activated. But then if we do OK, we come back in here. We copy this URL and then we open it up on a new web page. As you can see here, type in, so for example, test, and we've got this information coming back to us, which is not what we would want the customer to see, or if we were interacting with them in like a customer service way, but it just shows that we're able to send some data off and get it back as well. What we are going to do though is not make it publicly available for this use case. And what we're going to be able to do is allow file uploads or allow meme types. We're going to allow the file uploads in this case. So what this enables us to do is at the bottom, we can now open the chat. We'll just deactivate in here. So now, as you can see here, it looks like a chat window at the bottom. We've got the session ID. We've got the ability to upload files. So if I click on that, you can see it uploads some files. And we're going to be able to send some messages off in the background as well. So what we're going to do next? Well, we're going to come across to plus, and then we can do advanced AI. And this is where all of your AI agents are going to be. There's some templates in here. So again, this is where you can click, we can do AI, and that's where it's got some of the AI agents built already for us to go. So for example, down here, we've got one that will scrape web pages automatically. We've also got a video on the channel, which I'll include around how to go and actually scrape some data using an AI agent. Lots of different platforms out there like Bright Data, Apify, that can go through and do this for you automatically. So again, that lead generation use case we keep referring back to, it'd be great for that. Or if you're doing some qualification around leads, or if you're doing some competitor analysis, this platform would be absolutely great to go through and extract that information. We'll do advanced AI, and then we can come down and we've got a few different options here. So as mentioned, we've got the AI agent, which is going to have all of the different sub nodes, sub workflows like we've got up here. So we're going to have the main agent and then any sub nodes, any sub workflows, or we can come through and we can just use the LLM models directly. So we've got OpenAI straight away. We've got some LLM chains in there as well. We've got some other AI nodes, but again, they're not as key to start off with. These are the ones that you're going to be using the most. If we click on AI agent, what we're going to have is connected to chat trigger node. What this basically means is because we've tied it into our chat here, it's going to be using that information straight away. If you've got a different way of the information coming into the agent, you need to click on this. You need to do define below, and then you need to enter the information in here. So for example, if you've got an email coming through, you need to have the email on the left-hand side here, pull the message across, put it in here, make sure it goes green, and then it will be able to analyze the information coming through. We can require a specific output. So if we turn that on, we're going to need to use an output parser to make sure that it pulls it through. So again, if you click on this, it'll show you the different ways that it can structure the output. If we come back in here, we can get rid of that. We can add some options in here as well. So we can do system message. So again, this is where we tailor it to the specific use cases. If it's customer support, if it's sales, if it's automation, if it's a support agent internally, lots of different ways that it can be used. You would add that in here. Again, if you do expression, you'll be able to pop that out into this big screen, and it's much easier to work with, much easier to understand where you're going and the information. You can do maximum iterations. This is the number of times it will execute its processes. We can do return immediate steps as well. So whether or not the output should include the actions that the agent took. We can also pass through binary image as well. So as you can see there, if we're actually having any information come through, the AI agent will be able to process it as well. We can close that down. We can just get rid of all of these for today because we're not going to be using them. We can also come up to the top here and we can give it a name. So for example, if this was our coordinator agent, we'd be able to add that in there. You can have multiple agents tied together as well. So we can come through, we can do another AI agent in there. We could get rid of this. We could add our LLM in here as well. So for example, plus advanced AI, we could do OpenAI. What we'll be able to then do is all of these different actions. And what that will look like is if I just come through and do message and assistant, is you need to add your credentials in here, and this is what it will look like. We can add in our basic LLM as well. So what this will do is it will use that chat trigger mode, or we can specify a different input for it to use. We can add system prompts in here. So again, AI, user, and system. This is just different ways of feeding it information. A lot of the use cases that we use, we have a priming prompt. So that's kind of the system or a system prompt. This is basically telling the AI agent some context, what it needs to do, how it needs to behave. And then we use the user one to pass in some specific information. So if we come back to the start though, we can do chat model. As you can see on the right hand side, we've got all the different ones that we're able to use. You'll need an API key for any of these if you try and use them. For example, if we come down to OpenRouter, we'll come down here, we'll do create new credential. We'll need our API key. We need to come across to OpenRouter. We'll come up to our account, we'll do keys. We'll create a new key, so we'll just call it n8n masterclass. We'll do create. We'll be given a specific token. We'll come back across, we'll paste in there, we'll do save. And as you can see, it's gone green again, which means that's great. That's exactly what we wanted. And now we've got the option of all of these different models to be able to use it. For example, we've got DeepSeek in there, we've got Claude in there. So again, lots of different ones you'll be able to use. That's why I quite like OpenRouter, because you can go through and change and adjust and get the inputs that you want. So this is going to be our AI brain. What we can do on the right hand side is if we just click on that as well, we can do tidy up workflow and it will just make it look a little bit neater. What we can also do is add in another one. So for example here, if we wanted to add, for example, OpenAI, so we'd be able to come down to OpenAI. We do create a credential. We need our API key in here. So what we want to do is come across to our OpenAI developer platform. I'll include some of the links below. We want to come across to dashboard. We want to come down to our API keys. We're going to do create a new API key. We'll say n8n master class. We can do create new secret key. We can copy this key. We can come back into our environment. We can paste it in there. We can do save. And now what we'll be able to do is, as you can see there, we're now fully authenticated and we're able to use OpenAI as well. So we can rename this to OpenAI Brain. So now we've got the two different options of using OpenRouter, or we can use OpenAI directly. So if we connect this back up, we're going to use our OpenRouter one just for today. And then what we'll do is we'll just tie that in there. We'll move this to the side. So there we go, able to use that. We can come through and do our memory as well. So this will be basically how many of the previous chats it will be able to leverage in that conversation if we do simple memory, or we'll be able to do lots of more complex stuff with some of these other integrations as well. So if we, for example, in here, so what this will do is it will be using the ID from that chat that we're going through. So in the bottom right hand corner, that would be this session ID. So ending in 0B2, basically just to know that's the conversation that's been going through. Again, if we were using something like Telegram, we'd need to go through and pass the chat ID. So we knew what conversation was happening at what time. You can change this to as much or as little as you want for the context window. Again, this would just be the previous chats that it will remember, so we can leverage it and get a really good output in the future. we're going to change that to chat trigger node. And then what this will do is chat history. So how do we get our AI agent to do things? Well, that's where tools come in. So now if I click on here, as you can see, we've got the ability to call another workflow. So that's where maybe we've got those other processes that we've already defined. You'd be able to go through and execute that, and also enables you to have lots of different agents maybe connect into one process. If you're developing this like a consultancy, we've got all these different abilities. Again, this is where your 400 plus integrations come through. So as you can see there, lots and lots of different areas that you can do. We're going to go through and do Airtable. We'll do Airtable tool. As we can see here, because we've already authenticated from a bit earlier, we've got that ready to go. We can specify it automatically, or we can do it manually, depends on what you want. We can do records or base. We can do get, create, search, update, lots and lots of different ways of interacting with it. We can do lists. So for example here, n8n masterclass. We could come through and do table 1, and then you'd be able to specify the record IDs if you've got that in there. We can add the ability to download attachments, lots and lots of different ways that you can work with it. And that's where you're going to end up with multiple tools. So for example, that's a create one. We can do Airtable, and we're going to do Airtable tool. You'll be able to do this, and you can change this as get. So then you're going to end up with multiple different tools, and that's where your MCP that we mentioned a bit earlier is going to be coming really handy to be able to have lower amounts of these, so it knows automatically what it can do in each tool and be able to go and complete that action automatically straight away. And we've got lots of videos on the channel that show how to do this as well. So what we are going to do then is go through and show you how you're able to chat with data. So for example, we've got our chat message. So what we'd be able to do is, for example, in here, we could do answer. We'll be able to do vector question answer. We've got a limit of 4. We've got the data name. So again, we can add that in there in a second. We can do Q&A for customer. We can give it a description of the data if we want as well. So we can say the key information for the customer. It's got a limit of 4 in there. So what we'll be able to do is then come through and specify the vector store. So we could do a simple vector store. So what this would do is it will retrieve documents within the actual conversation. We can insert some documents if we want to as well. We can do document store as AI agent tool. So lots and lots of different ways that you can leverage this. We're going to go through and retrieve documents as vector store chain. We can do vector store. We're going to do simple vector store. We'll make sure that's all connected up. We'll do some embeddings. So this is just going to be the sort of AI model that it does to really fine tune how that data is stored, how it's recalled, and that's how we're going to be using it. We're going to use the small version now, but you've got all the different ones. Again, this is where you're going to need your OpenAI key to be able to do that. You can specify dimensions, batch size. Again, this is getting quite complicated. This is more the advanced side, so we won't touch on that just for now. But as you can see here, we're now all good to go from this side. We can add a model in here. So we'll just do our OpenRouter model. We'll keep it on the mini version. So now we've got the ability to be able to answer questions or queries, but we haven't got any information in there at the moment. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to come down here. We're going to do add a node. We're going to do form, and then we're going to do on new web form event. We're going to say upload file. We're going to do this as a file. So there we go. We can say multiple files. We can specify the version. So for example, PDF. We're able to do this as a required field, form submitted, and then what we're going to do is come out of there just for now. So what we've got, for example, here is the ability to have 2 workflows in the same space. So what we're going to do is come through to here. We're going to add the next step, which is vector. We'll come down to simple vector store. We're going to do add documents to vector store. We're going to come out of there. We'll just bring this up a little bit. The embeddings, again, we're going to use our OpenAI. Now, if we come back into our environment, as we come down here, there's a really good article that I recommend on Medium. I'll include the link below as well. And it really talks to how we can leverage this and what each step of the process is. So for example, what embedding is. So we'll come back out of here. The document, we're going to be able to do default data loader. We're going to do binary because we're going to be getting that information from that form that comes across. It's not going to be in a JSON format. We're going to be able to load all of the input data. You can load specific parts if you want. We're going to automatically detect, but if you've got all of the different variables in here, so for example, it would only load it if it's a PDF document, you could specify that. We can actually break it down into different areas in there as well if we need to. So if we just bring that back up, we'll do text splitter. We're going to do recursive text character splitter. And basically what it's doing is it's chunking up. So what it means is it doesn't have to recall all of the information that we're going to give it. Actually, it's only going to need to recall a certain part of it as we go through it and use it. So what we can do now is save. We can come into here. We can give it a title, so we can do data capture. So we can give this a quick test. It will open it up for us. We can come through and do choose a file. We'll just add in one of the market research papers that we've got around the adoption around AI. What we'll see is this gets submitted. We'll come back into our agent. As you can see there, it's now starting to load that data. And what we should be able to do is come through and chat with it. So if I come down to the bottom, we can say, please tell me about the research paper. We can send it off, and then what it should be able to do is come down to our vector database here. And what this is basically doing is it's able to recall the information as we need it. So for example, here it's the AI paper in the vector database. And the reason that we're getting these sort of questions come through is because in our AI agent, we haven't specified the prompt. So for example, in here, system message, that's where you really want to go through and specify the information. So it looks like we've not been able to recall the information around the paper. And the reason for that is we just need to connect it directly. So for example, in here, we'll call it database for key reports. We can say the repository of key reports for the use cases. We'll just join this up because otherwise it won't be happy because it needs it to be joined up string. There we go. So now if we come through and chat with it, we shouldn't get that issue again. We should be able to send that off, and then what it will be able to do is provide the responses back to us. So we should be able to understand all of the information about the paper. Now it's going through and chunking it up for us. So this is, again, a really simple way to be able to get that output that comes through. You can do it with much more complex data, or we could have it really good in like a sales use case for being able to recall contracts, information about customers, all of this sort of stuff. And as you can see there, we've got lots of information about it. We could say, when was the paper published? We can send that off. And now we're able to easily dynamically chat with the data that we've got in our database and be able to go through and record the information as we need it. Again, that's where, because we're using OpenRouter as our AI brain, we can go through and change the output that we get. But again, you can adjust it to really fine tune it to what you want. And that's where if we come in here, your system prompt is really key to be able to use that as well. And that's where, just as we mentioned, you're able to string some of these agents together. So for example, here, we could go through and do advanced AI. We could do sentiment analysis. We could then get the text that comes out the back of that. We could do sentiment analysis. We need to come through and just connect our models. We'll just do the OpenRouter one in there. And then what we'll be able to see is that you've now got the three options of positive, negative, or neutral. So we could come through and do test step. So now what it's going to be able to see is that we've got a lot of neutral information that comes back, and we'll be able to use that in the future. So again, they're really good for your customer use cases. So for example, the other way that we could do it is if we get rid of this, what we'll be able to do is come up to the top. We can duplicate our form. So if we come up here, we can copy and then paste this. We'll bring it up to the top again. What we can do is after this, we'll be able to do summarization chain. We'll be able to use node input. So this is going to take it directly from our form. We're then going to do the model. We can come down and do OpenRouter. We'll use OpenAI. So for example there, if we come through and we do test, we can upload a file in here. So for example, if we do exactly the same research paper and we do submit, what it will be able to do is go through and summarize that entire paper for us. So if we come into here, what we can see is that it's captured it. And now we'll be able to use that data. So if we do test step, what it should come through and do is actually analyze all of that information for us. So think where you've got lots of information coming through. Maybe you've got a legal use case, you've got contracts coming through, you've got all of that sort of information. Maybe you've got some newsletters, maybe you're very busy. We could also have some other data like maybe YouTube videos come through. This would be able to go through, really analyze it and produce that output for you in that like exec summary style. There's a lot of information in this paper, so it's going to take a little while to go through. And if we come out of here, you can see how it's going through and it's trying to analyze all of that information. So as we come back in here, it should chunk up to that 1,000 characters as we need it. So if we wait for this output to come through, so there we go, we've got it executed successfully. So we can come through, and as you can see in JSON, we've got all this information and we've got it in the table format as well. So what we're going to run through quickly is just that last part around Google, how to leverage it. Quickly, we'll just go through and do Google. We'll come through and do Google Docs. We'll do create a document. So we're going to need through and create a credential. So as you can see here, there's lots of information that we're going to need to add. So for example, client ID, client secret. So how do we do that? We're going to need to come into Google Cloud. So as you can see here, we've got another example. We're going to come through and we're going to do new project. We're going to call this our n8n master class. We're going to come down and do create. So what we should do is it will take a little while to load. So as we can see in the top right corner, it's just going through and creating that project. We can do select project. So it's now gone through and made the changes for us. First of all, we're going to come into our APIs and services. We're going to come across to enable APIs and services. We're going to enable our Google Drive API. We'll come back out of there. We'll do Google Docs. We'll enable Google Docs, and what you need to go through is go and enable all of these for the different ones you want to use. So for example, Google Sheets, what you need to do is go through enable Google Sheets, and then what it will do is it will go green, and then what you'll have is a manage button instead of an enablement button. It takes a little while to load, but that means you're all good to go. So as we can see now, we've got disable API, but we've also got all of the other ones that we need. We're going to come into APIs and services. We're going to come down to OAuth overview. We're going to do get started. We'll call it n8n master class for this. We'll give it our email. There we go. We'll do next. We'll do external. We'll do next. We'll give it our email address again. There we go. We'll do next. We'll do I agree. We'll do continue. We'll do create. We're going to do create an OAuth client. Application type. We're going to do web application. We're going to call it n8n master class. We're going to come down to redirect URIs. We're going to come back into our Google account. This is where we're going to need to copy and click on this. Come back into here. We'll paste in there. We'll do create. So now we've got client secret and all of this information. We're going to need to come down to audience. We're going to need to add in a test user. So we'll come in and add our email address. We'll do save. Now what we should be able to do is if we come back into our platform, we'll come back into our APIs and services. What you should do now is if we come into credentials, we should see n8n masterclass, all good to go. And if we click in there, we will have our client ID, client secret, and we've just enabled to be able to have the ability for a test user as well. You've got to make sure that the test user you specify is the account that you're going to be logging in with. So for example, here, if I add our client ID in there, we'll copy and paste in there. We'll copy the client secret. We'll paste that in there. Now we'll have this sign in with Google appear at the bottom, so we can click on that. We'll be able to sign in with our account that we just specified as the test user. We'll do allow. It will do connection successful, so that means we're all good to go. So there we go. We're now all authenticated. We're green. We're good to go. So if we come back in here, we see we can do document. We can do create. We can save it in a specific drive. We can come in here, we can give it a specific location if we wanted to. So if we wanted to find the folder name, what we could do is we can come through to here, we could do delete, we could do Google Drive instead. We could do search files and folders. We could come through and we call master class. We can do one. What we can do is test step, and then what we should get on the right hand side here is the ID that it relates to. So we can copy this. We'll come back in here, Google Docs, create a document. We'll come down folder name, we'll do expression, we'll add our key in there, and we'll say summary of report. And then just to show you before we upload it, as you can see here, nothing in there at the moment. But if we come through, what we'll be able to do is test step. It should generate our document for us. Now, if we come in here, you can see that we've got that report all ready to go for us. So now if we come in here, we could do plus Google and Docs. And then what we'll be able to do is update a document. We can see that we've got the document ID. So again, we're pulling that across so it's nice and easy. We're simplifying it. The text, we're just going to add in the text that we've just generated. So then what we can do is at the bottom here, you can add any other actions if you wanted to. Again, all of this is just the information that you're adding in. So header, footer, if you've got something like a contract that you always stand out, you'll be able to do that with something like find and replace text. What you'll be able to do is insert as well, so specific position, indexing, whatever you want. We've got some add fields in there if you want to add anything else in there. So for example, if I come back into our environment, we do open summary of report. What I can do is test step. So again, it was empty and now it's got all of this information in here that we've just added. So again, to show you how quick that is, I'll get rid of it, come back in here, do test step, and there you go. It's all added in nice and easy automatically so that we'll be able to go through and use that. Another thing that I'll show you which is really useful is if we delete this, we can do Google and then Google Drive. We can do download a file, and then what we'll be able to do, for example, is we can change the expression. We could do by ID. We can add that in there. We can do options. We can do Google file conversion. We can add a conversion in there. So for example, what we've just done is changed it so that any of the Google Docs we developed are going to be outputted as a PDF. So for example here, we've now got that as a PDF ready to go. Now we've covered a lot in this video today. We've done everything around how to set up more of the automation side, how to use some of the AI agents as well. We've got lots of other videos on the channel, which will include some links on below, as well as you'll find in the actual playlist section of my channel. I hope this was useful. Stay tuned for more around AI agents and have a great day.